cast out and
Meet
ridiculed
me
by the Alpha
by the
brother,
northern gate
until
at
the Alpha
midnight.
King stepped forward and claimed
Tell
her.
no one.
The castle below was alive with voices, laughter, and music, yet none of it reached her. Tonight she was invisible. Her own brother Darius, the alpha heir of their pack, had made sure of that. His words still rang in her ears, sharp and bitter, slicing through her like a blade. "You are weak," he had said, his voice carrying through the grand hall, echoing against marble walls. "A disgrace to your name. The pack will never respect you." The humiliation had been complete. Nobles and warriors alike had turned their eyes toward her, some with pity, most with judgment. Even the servants whispered behind her back. The warmth of the torchlight on the walls could not reach the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She had tried to speak, to explain herself, but the words had died in her throat. Darius had laughed, loud and cruel, as if her voice had no worth. Now alone, she felt the weight of that ridicule pressing on her chest. Her hands trembled as she gripped the stone railing. She could not remain here, not tonight, not ever. Alara had learned in the harshest way that power in their world was never given. It was taken, claimed, and defended with blood and teeth. Her brother had been raised to dominate, to rule with strength, but she had been taught to obey. She had tried to follow the rules, to hide her own gifts, the small flickers of magic that lived in her fingertips. She had thought she could survive by being invisible, by being quiet, by bending to the expectations of others. But Darius had seen through it, as he always did, and he had torn her apart in front of everyone. She stepped back from the balcony, pulling her cloak tightly around her shoulders. The halls of the castle seemed narrower than usual, suffocating her. Even the portraits on the walls of ancestors with stern faces and cold eyes seemed to judge her. She could not breathe here. Without a second thought, Alara left. She passed through the servants' corridors, avoiding the guards and the eyes of anyone who might recognize her. She carried only what she could hold in her arms: a small pouch with a few coins, a dagger her father had once given her, and the faint, stubborn flame of her own magic. Outside, the night was alive with the song of the forest. Mist curled around the trees like a living thing, and the moon cast pale silver light over the damp earth. The air was sharp and clean, and for a moment she felt free. The walls that had trapped her, that had judged her, could not reach her here. She was alone, yes, but perhaps that was a kind of safety she had never known before. She wandered, not knowing where she would go. The forest stretched endlessly, a world of shadows and whispers. Alara had been warned many times. The forest was dangerous, especially at night. Wolves and spirits roamed freely, hunting the unwary. But she did not care. Her heart ached with a need to escape, to find something beyond the cruelty of the castle. The trees seemed to lean closer as she passed, their branches like fingers brushing against her cloak. The wind whispered secrets she could not understand, secrets from a time before humans had ruled the land. In the distance, she saw a river glimmering in the moonlight. Its surface was black, smooth like glass, yet it moved with a life of its own. Alara knelt at the riverbank, staring into the water. For a long moment she did not speak, only listened. The forest was quiet now, as if it too were waiting for something. She reached out a hand, letting the cold water touch her fingertips. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold but from the feeling that the river was alive, that it was watching her, judging her, inviting her to see herself as she truly was. She did not like what she saw at first. Her reflection was pale, drawn, and weary. Her eyes, once bright and curious, looked hollow, but as she stared longer she began to notice something else. A spark of light, faint but persistent, glimmered beneath the surface of her skin. Magic, her magic. It had always been there, hidden, but now it pulsed like a heartbeat, calling her to trust it. Alara realized something that made her both afraid and exhilarated. She had been taught to hide, to be small and quiet, but hiding had not saved her. It had only made her a target. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding. Perhaps it was time to claim herself, even if the world refused to see her worth. A sudden rustle in the trees made her spin. Her hand went to the dagger at her waist, but there was nothing there, just shadows and mist. Still, her heart raced. The forest was full of eyes, some human, some not. Alara took a deep breath and reminded herself. Fear was a tool, but it did not have to control her. She could move forward. She could survive. She could become more than the girl who had been laughed at by her brother. Hours passed, though she did not know it. She walked until her legs ached and her cloak was damp with dew. And then she saw him. He stood in a clearing, tall and imposing, his presence commanding the forest itself to bow before him. His eyes glowed faintly like embers in the dark. The Alpha King, legendary, feared, revered. She had heard stories of him in whispers, how he could bend the will of beasts, how he walked through shadows without fear, how he could see the truth in a person's heart with a single glance. Alara froze, unsure whether to run or stay. But the king's gaze found her and she could not look away. It was not just fear she saw there. It was recognition, as if he could see everything she had tried to hide, her shame, her anger, her spark of magic, her longing. "You should not be here," he said, his voice deep, calm, and commanding. "And yet here you are." Alara swallowed hard. I had no choice," she said, her voice trembling. "My brother, her words faltered. How could she explain the betrayal, the humiliation, the pain, without sounding weak? The king studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The air around him seemed to shimmer with power, yet he moved with ease as if the forest itself parted to make way. "You are not as weak as you think," he said, "and you are not safe alone. Come with me." Alara wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him she could manage, that she did not need a protector. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw a truth she could not deny. He saw her, truly saw her, and he offered something that no one else had ever offered: acknowledgement, respect, perhaps even hope. The king led her through the forest, and though Alara's heart still ached with the memory of her brother's scorn, a small flame of courage ignited within her. For the first time, she felt that her life might not be over, that she could survive, even thrive, despite everything that had happened. As they walked, she noticed faint signs in the forest: a bird with black feathers tipped in red, a fox with eyes too knowing for a simple animal, a tree whose bark seemed to pulse with light. The world was alive, watching, waiting. And she was part of it now, whether she wanted it or not. Finally, they stopped at the edge of a small clearing where the air shimmered faintly, as if the very forest were holding its breath. The king turned to her. "You will not be ridiculed again," he said. "Not by him. Not by anyone, but to stay with me, you must trust me, trust yourself, and learn to face what you have hidden from the world and from yourself." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and full of shadows. But for the first time, she did not feel entirely alone. She nodded. "I will try," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. I want to learn." The king inclined his head slightly, a gesture of approval and warning both. "Good. The night is long and the forest watches. But we are not alone. Not anymore." As they moved deeper into the trees, the mist thickened and the shadows seemed to pulse with secrets. Somewhere far away, a howl echoed, mournful and full of warning. Alara tightened her grip on her cloak and then allowed herself a small, tentative smile. She had been cast out, humiliated and scorned. But perhaps this night, this journey, was the beginning of something new. And in the depths of the forest, where shadows whispered and the air shimmered with old magic, Alara sensed that she had not only been found by the Alpha King, but that she might also be finding herself. Alara's heart still raced as she followed the Alpha King deeper into the forest. The mist wrapped around them like a living thing, shifting and whispering secrets she could not understand. Every step was a mixture of fear and awe. She had never been this close to someone so powerful, so dangerous, yet strangely protective. The king moved with a quiet confidence, his presence commanding the shadows to bend around him. It was not just strength he carried, but a calm, steady force, the kind that could make even the wild forest pause. Alara felt the weight of his gaze on her, though he did not speak. Somehow he was already testing her, learning her limits without a word. "You do not speak much," he said finally, his voice low and smooth, cutting through the mist. "Why?" Alara swallowed. I have learned to be quiet." "It is safer that way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "My brother, he does not forgive mistakes, and she hesitated. "I am used to being invisible." The king's eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, softened for a moment. "Invisible," he repeated. "A choice or a punishment?" "Both," she said honestly, "and neither I do not know any more." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand more than you realize. The world is cruel to those who are quiet, but sometimes quiet is the beginning of strength." Alara wanted to believe him. The words offered comfort, but fear still clung to her heart. She had been humiliated, cast out, and she was not yet sure if she could trust anyone, even this powerful alpha who now claimed her. They walked in silence for a while, the forest thickening around them. Strange lights glimmered among the trees, like the eyes of unseen creatures. Every now and then, Alara would hear whispers, voices carried on the wind, ancient and haunting. She shivered, but the king's presence beside her was like a shield. She felt protected, even if only a little. Finally, they reached a small clearing. A fire burned faintly in the center, surrounded by stones arranged in a circle. The Alpha King motioned for her to sit. "Rest," he said. "The night is long, and the forest is not always kind to travelers." Alara lowered herself to the ground, trying to steady her racing heart. She watched him as he knelt by the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. He seemed to hold the darkness itself in his hands, bending it without effort. And yet, there was a gentleness in his movements, a softness she had not expected. "You are different from the others," he said after a moment, as if reading her thoughts. "Most people would run at the first sign of fear. You stay, you look, you endure." Alara felt a strange warmth at his words. No one had ever seen her in that way, not her brother, not her family, not the servants or nobles who had laughed at her. The king's gaze held no mockery, no judgment, only truth. And for the first time in her life, she felt that her existence mattered. As the fire crackled, the king spoke of the forest, of the pack, and of the balance of power that governed both men and beasts. He spoke of duty, strength, and the weight of leadership, but also of solitude and loss. Alara listened intently, her curiosity growing with every word. She sensed that he, too, carried scars hidden beneath his calm exterior. A life of rule and responsibility had hardened him, but it had not taken his heart entirely. "You have power," he said suddenly, turning his gaze to her. "I can see it even now. You try to hide it, but it is there. A spark, dangerous but alive. You fear it, yet you should not." Alara's hands tightened in her lap. I do not know how to control it," she admitted, "and I am afraid it could hurt someone." The king's eyes softened further, a rare vulnerability shining through. "Power without control is dangerous, yes, but fear without trust is worse. You must learn to trust yourself. I can help you if you allow it." She hesitated. The words offered hope, but trust was not easy for her. Her brother had broken it, her family had doubted her, and the world had laughed at her mistakes. And yet, there was something in the king's voice, something that made her want to believe in herself. I will try," she whispered. The night deepened and the forest grew colder. The Alpha King moved closer, and Alara could feel the strength emanating from him. It was overwhelming and comforting at the same time. She realized with a start that she was not just following him, she was learning from him, absorbing his calm confidence and steady courage. "You have been cast out," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And yet you survive. You endure, that is not weakness." Alara looked down at her hands, the memory of her brother's cruel laughter still fresh. "It feels like weakness," she admitted. "To be laughed at, to be rejected. It feels like nothing I do will ever matter." The king placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. The touch was firm yet gentle. "You are wrong. What matters is not what others say, but what you do with yourself. The pack, the forest, the world, it respects strength. And strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it is courage. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is survival." Alara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a mixture of fear and hope. For the first time, she believed she might be capable of more than shame. She had been humiliated, cast out, and feared, but perhaps that was only the beginning of her story. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a rustling from the trees. Both of them froze. The Alpha King's eyes narrowed, glowing faintly in the darkness. Alara's heart pounded in her chest. The forest had been alive with whispers and shadows, but now there was movement, deliberate and watchful. From the darkness, a figure emerged. Tall, broad, and unmistakably familiar. Darius, her brother, the Alpha heir. His eyes blazed with fury and his lips curled into a sneer. "You dare run to him," Darius growled, stepping closer. "You think he will protect you. You belong to me first, not him. You are mine to shame, mine to punish." Alara took a step back, fear prickling her skin. She wanted to flee, but the king's presence was steady beside her, a silent promise of protection. "You have no claim here," the king said, his voice cold and commanding. "She is not yours. She belongs to herself and to no one who would hurt her." Darius laughed, cruel and sharp. "You protect her. You are a king of shadows, a master of beasts, but you cannot tame her spirit. She will return to me. She will always return to me." The tension crackled like lightning in the air. Alara's chest tightened, fear mixing with something else, determination. She had been powerless before, laughed at and ridiculed, but no longer. She could feel the power within her, the spark the king had noticed. And she was ready to fight for herself, to take a stand against the brother who had humiliated her. "Leave her be," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "She is not yours to control." Darius froze, his eyes widening at her defiance. The king placed a hand lightly on her shoulder again, a gesture of both caution and support. "You speak wisely," he said, "but do not think this will be easy. Your path will be full of tests, and your brother will not give up so easily." Alara felt a mixture of fear and resolve. She had been cast out, humiliated and mocked, but now she had a chance to claim herself, to learn, and perhaps to discover strength she had never imagined. Darius growled one last time, eyes blazing with anger, and retreated into the shadows of the forest, disappearing as suddenly as he had appeared. Alara sank to her knees, trembling from adrenaline and relief. The king knelt beside her, his eyes gentle now. "You have taken the first step," he said quietly. "The forest watches, the night is long, and dangers are still near. But tonight you have chosen courage over fear. Remember this." Alara looked up at him, the firelight flickering across his face. "I will try," she whispered again, this time with more certainty. I will learn to be strong." The king nodded. "Good, because strength is what you will need. And power too, but above all, trust yourself. That is the greatest gift you can give the world." As the night deepened, the fire burned lower and the forest seemed to lean closer around them. Strange shapes moved in the mist, and whispers floated on the wind, warnings and promises intertwined. Alara felt a thrill of fear and excitement. Her journey was just beginning. She had been cast out, humiliated, and laughed at, but she was no longer alone. She had the Alpha King beside her, guiding her, testing her, and seeing her as she truly was. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of a bond that would challenge them both. A bond of trust, power, and perhaps something more. Ilara's nights were no longer silent. The forest seemed alive with whispers, shadows that moved just beyond her sight, and eyes that glowed faintly in the mist. The Alpha King had promised her protection, but she had begun to understand that protection alone was not enough. She needed to face the darkness herself, the fear, the shame, and the hidden power she had tried to ignore. The fire in the clearing burned low as the king watched her, his eyes glowing faintly. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked. "The curse. It has followed your bloodline for generations. It is the reason your brother seeks to shame you, the reason your family doubts you, and the reason your power has been feared and hidden." Alara swallowed hard. The word curse had haunted her life without ever being spoken aloud. She had felt it in the cold stares, in the ridicule, in the sharp edge of Darius's anger. "What does it mean?" she asked quietly. "It means that your family carries a shadow," the king explained. "A weight meant to weaken, to make you fear yourselves, but curses are not absolute. They can be broken if you are willing to face them." Alara's hands clenched in her lap. She had lived in fear all her life, hiding who she truly was. Could she be strong enough to face this curse? Could she trust herself? The forest seemed to lean closer, as if it knew she was on the edge of a decision that would change everything. The king stood and extended a hand. "Come, you will not face this alone." Alara took a deep breath and rose. The mist swirled around them as they walked deeper into the forest, following a path only the king seemed to know. Shadows stretched long and twisted, but she no longer felt entirely afraid. She had him beside her, steady, strong, a presence that made the cold fear in her chest feel manageable. They came to a river, dark and still, its surface reflecting the moon like a sheet of black glass. The king stopped and turned to her. "The curse is strongest at the river," he said. "It is the bloodline's weakness, but also its mirror. You must face yourself here, or the darkness will claim you." Alara knelt at the riverbank, her reflection wavering in the water. The face staring back at her was pale and weary, but beneath it she thought she saw something else, a spark, small and defiant like a tiny flame refusing to go out. "You are afraid," the king said, his voice gentle, "and you should be. Fear sharpens the mind, but it must not control you. Touch the water. Let it show you your truth." Alara hesitated, then dipped her hand into the river. The cold water shocked her, but as it touched her skin, images flashed before her eyes. Memories of her childhood, her brother's scorn, the ridicule from the castle, and moments she had tried to forget, all mingled with visions of power she had never allowed herself to embrace. She saw herself standing tall, confident, unafraid. She saw herself facing danger and surviving. She saw herself not as a victim, but as someone who could fight, who could lead, who could endure. Tears pricked her eyes. She whispered, "I do not know if I am strong enough." The king knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers in the water. "Strength is not born from certainty. It is born from facing fear again and again. You have it, Alara. You only need to claim it." Hours passed as they worked together. The king guided her through rituals and exercises, encouraging her to embrace the spark within her, to let it grow. Each time she faltered, he reminded her of her courage, and each time she succeeded, the shadows seemed to retreat slightly, as if acknowledging her growing power. During a moment of rest, Alara finally dared to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why? Why did you choose to help me? Why not leave me to my brother's cruelty?" The king's gaze softened, and for the first time, Alara saw a vulnerability she had not noticed before. "Because I see myself in you," he said quietly. "I was once bound by fear and doubt, hiding my power, ashamed of who I was. And I could not let someone else suffer that same pain if I could prevent it. You remind me that strength is not only in the body, but in the heart. And perhaps, in teaching you, I learn more about myself as well." Alara felt a warmth in her chest, a connection she had never felt before. She had been alone for so long, and now, in the depths of the forest, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. The quiet was shattered by a sudden growl. Alara jumped, her hands trembling. The king's eyes narrowed, glowing with a faint light. From the shadows, a wolf-like figure emerged, larger than any normal wolf, with eyes that burned like coals. Its fur shimmered with darkness, and it moved with a grace that was almost human. "It is a guardian of the curse," the king explained. It will test you. You cannot run, you must face it. Alara's heart raced. She had never confronted a creature like this, but she remembered the lessons of the river. She drew on the spark within her, feeling it pulse in her veins. She raised her hands, and for the first time she allowed the energy to flow from her fingertips. The creature hesitated, sensing her power. "Good," the king said. "Do not fear it. You are stronger than you think." Alara focused, feeling the fear and anger from her past feed her courage. She met the creature's glowing eyes and, without moving backward, held her ground. Slowly, the wolf-like guardian bowed its head, acknowledging her strength, then vanished into the shadows. Alara collapsed to her knees, shaking but exhilarated. She had faced fear, confronted the curse, and survived. The king helped her stand, his gaze proud but gentle. "You are learning," he said, "and you are beginning to see that your past does not define you. Your power does not make you dangerous. It makes you whole." Days passed as they traveled through the forest, confronting trials and shadows, learning to trust one another and themselves. Alara's power grew, but so did her understanding of responsibility. She realized that strength was not just for fighting or surviving. It was for protecting, for guiding, and for forgiving. One night, as they rested beside the river, the king looked at her with a serious expression. "You have come far, Alara, but the curse is not yet broken. There is one final step, one final confrontation. You must face the spirit of your family's shame, the part of the curse that has haunted your bloodline for generations." Alara swallowed hard. I am ready," she said, though her voice wavered. Fear still lived in her, but so did determination. She would not run. She would not hide. She would face the darkness. They entered a clearing where the mist was thick and the air felt heavy with magic. Shadows moved as if alive, twisting into forms that whispered her name and repeated her brother's cruel words. Alara's knees trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. The spirit of the curse appeared as a figure in shadow, tall and imposing, with eyes like dark fire. It spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. "You are weak. You are unworthy. You cannot escape me." Alara took a deep breath. She remembered the river, the lessons of the forest, and the guidance of the king. "I am not weak," she said firmly. "I am not unworthy. I am me, and I choose my path." The shadow hissed and lunged, but Alara raised her hands, letting her power flow freely for the first time. Light burst from her fingertips, pure and bright, cutting through the darkness. The shadow shrieked and writhed, but it could not hold against her courage and newfound strength. The king stood beside her, lending his power, but it was Alara's will that drove the shadow back. With a final surge, the curse dissolved into the night, leaving only mist and silence. Alara fell to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. She had faced the darkness, claimed her power, and begun to free herself from the shame that had haunted her bloodline. The king knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have done what few could," he said quietly. "You faced fear, embraced your power, and claimed yourself. The curse is broken, at least for now." Tears filled Alara's eyes. She had been cast out, humiliated, and ridiculed. She had faced shadows, spirits, and the cruelty of her brother. And now she was no longer the frightened girl she had once been. She was strong and she was free. The forest was quiet, but the silence was heavy with anticipation. Alara could feel it in her bones, the lingering pulse of the curse, the restless stir of shadows, and the presence of someone watching from afar. She stood beside the Alpha King, her hand brushing against his arm, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. Together they had faced fear, confronted power, and shattered the darkness that had haunted her bloodline. But the trials were not yet over. In the distance, the mist shifted, forming shapes that danced like specters. Alara's heart quickened. She had faced the curse, controlled her power, and grown stronger than she had ever imagined. But Darius, her brother, and something older, darker, yet unseen, still lingered in the shadows. "Are you ready?" the king asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. Alara nodded. "I am ready. Whatever comes, I will not run. They stepped forward, the mist curling around them like fingers of an unseen hand. The forest seemed to hold its breath as they approached a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. At its center, a figure emerged, tall, imposing, and radiating anger. Darius, the alpha heir, his eyes blazing with fury, his lips curled into a cruel smile. "You think you can escape me," he growled. "You belong to this pack, to me. You cannot deny your place." Alara's chest tightened, but she stood tall, letting her newfound power flow through her. She remembered the lessons of the river, the trials of the forest, and the guidance of the king. Fear still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. "I am not yours to claim," she said, her voice steady. "I am my own, and I will not let you control me any more." Darius laughed, sharp and bitter. Bold words for someone so small. The king stepped forward, his presence a wall of strength beside her. "She is not small," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "She is stronger than you will ever understand, and I will not allow you to harm her." The tension crackled like lightning in the air. Darius lunged forward, but Alara raised her hands, letting her power flow like a shield between them. The force of it pushed him back, and for the first time she realized she could stand against him, not just with the king's help, but with her own strength. The forest around them seemed to react to her power. Shadows shrank back, and the mist twisted into shapes that mirrored her courage. She felt a surge of energy, a connection to the very earth beneath her feet, the trees around her, and the moon above. She was no longer the frightened girl humiliated by her brother. She was a force to be reckoned with. Darius growled, fury flashing in his eyes. "You think this will end here? You think you are free?" Alara shook her head. "I am free. And I will fight for that freedom, for myself, for my family, for the future of this forest and pack." With a roar, Darius charged again, and the Alpha King moved beside Alara, his hand brushing hers in a gesture of support. Together they faced him, their combined power forming a shield against his attacks. But it was not only strength that mattered, it was courage, trust, and the bond they had formed. Alara felt her power rise, brighter and stronger than ever. Light flowed from her hands, weaving with the king's energy, surrounding them in a protective aura. Darius faltered, his confidence shaken by the force of their unity. Suddenly, the shadows in the forest shifted more violently, and a dark, ancient presence revealed itself. It was neither human nor beast, but something older, something that had lingered since the time of curses and forgotten magic. Its voice echoed through the clearing, deep and resonant, filled with both warning and challenge. "You think you can end what has lasted for centuries," it said. "The curse, the shadows, the fear, all of it is mine to claim." Alara's hands trembled, but she did not retreat. She drew a deep breath and let the energy within her flow freely. She felt the king's presence beside her, steady and unwavering. Together, they formed a bond of light and courage that touched the edges of the darkness. "You do not own me," Alara said, her voice clear and unwavering. "You do not own my blood, my life, or my heart. I am stronger than your shadows, and I am not alone." The darkness surged, lashing at her with cold, twisting tendrils. But Alara met it with fire. Her magic burned brightly, pure and unyielding, weaving around the king's energy to form a shield that pushed back the shadows. The forest seemed to hum with the power of their unity, as if even the trees and mist recognized the strength of their bond. Darius fell back, defeated by the sheer force of their combined will. The dark presence howled, a sound that shook the very earth, but it could not overcome the courage and power of Alara and the king. Light and shadow clashed, but in the end, light prevailed. The darkness dissipated into the mist, leaving only a calm, quiet forest in its wake. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. She had faced her brother, confronted the curse, and stood against a power older than memory. For the first time, she truly felt free. The humiliation, the fear, and the ridicule that had haunted her life were gone, replaced by strength, courage, and self-belief. The king knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have done what few could," he said quietly. "You have faced your fears, embraced your power, and claimed yourself. The curse is broken. You are free." Alara looked up at him, tears filling her eyes. I never thought I could be this strong. I never thought I could face everything and survive." "You are stronger than you know," the king said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "And you will only grow stronger. This is not the end, Alara. It is the beginning." Days passed as they left the clearing behind. The forest, once full of shadows and whispers, now felt lighter, as if it had been cleansed of the old curse. Alara's confidence grew with each step. She no longer flinched at shadows, nor trembled at the thought of danger. She had faced darkness and survived, and she knew that she could face whatever came next. The bond between her and the king deepened as well. They shared moments of quiet understanding, of laughter and stories, and sometimes just the simple comfort of being near one another. Alara realized that strength was not only about magic or courage, it was also about trust, friendship, and love. "You have changed," the king said one evening as they rested beneath a towering tree. "Not just in power, but in heart. You are no longer the girl who was cast out. You are something greater." Alara smiled faintly. "I never could have done it alone. You taught me to trust myself, to face fear, and to see my own strength." "And you taught me something too," he replied softly. "That even kings, even those who command power, can learn from courage and hope. That strength is not only in ruling others, but in understanding them." Weeks passed, and the forest seemed to thrive under their care. Shadows still lingered in corners, and dangers were never entirely gone, but Alara no longer feared them. She had become a force of her own, guided by wisdom, courage, and the bond she shared with the king. Finally, the time came to return to the edge of the forest, where the lands of the pack met the wider world. Alara looked out over the trees, the river glimmering in the distance, and felt a sense of completion. She had faced ridicule, humiliation, and fear. She had confronted curses, shadows, and even her own doubts, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and free. The king stood beside her, watching her with a quiet pride. "Are you ready to face the world?" he asked. Alara nodded. "I am, and this time I am not alone." They stepped forward together, leaving the forest behind but carrying its lessons within them. The path ahead would have challenges, but Alara knew she had the strength to face them, with courage, with power, and with the king at her side.